Joining us now, Dr. Jasser, who is the Director President of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and the author of the book, A Battle for the Soul of Islam. Welcome, sir. Nice to have you here today.
It's good to be with you, Uma. Thanks.
I wanted to ask you first off your impressions about that unusual news conference of the lawyers for the Farouk family, who had seemed quite defensive and concerned that perceptions of this couple may be tainted.
It's amazing to me that they're supposed to be the lawyers for the family, and it almost seems like they're working for the Islamist groups in America to try to cajole what the reality is about the problem we have within the House of Islam. So, you know, it's interesting. The family immediately had contacts with the Council on American Islamic Relations, which is so busy in radicalizing our community that ultimately they're telling our community that America is against them, it's about foreign policy, all these insulting excuses, and the attorneys are basically continuing that mantra that somehow Islamism has nothing to do with it, it's just sort of some spontaneous combustion. The bottom line is that allegiance is a long time coming in a radicalization process. What happened was an operationalization with ISIS in the last few weeks or whenever she pledged allegiance that made her a violent jihadist. The nonviolent jihadism was going on for years, and that's what the community doesn't want you to hear about.
Well, you know, despite the evidence of the terror ties to this couple, it's as though so many remain concerned about political correctness when we're talking about security on the home front. What's your reaction to the reports about folks who lived next to them and said even though they observed some unusual late-night activity at the suspect's home, they didn't want to call police or report anything for fear of being called racist? Do you think our PC culture has gone too far?
Not only has it gone too far, it's become surrender. I mean, we've been doing this for how long? We had Nidal Hassan, who was carrying around cards. Where I trained at the Naval Hospital at Walter Reed, he was carrying around a card that said Soldier of Allah, and people in our military were afraid to report it because of the fear of being targeted by these ambulance-chasing type groups like CARE and other groups that want to make Americans pay a penalty for reporting things and being smart citizens about see something, say something. Now, having said that, if only the Muslim community was not asleep and we just had a summit in which reformers have gotten together and many of us are starting to try to take the platform away from the victim mongers who want to deflect responsibility, and we're trying to say we own it. There's reform that has to be done. You need devout Muslims to win this. It's not the entire House of Islam. So ultimately, Americans, when we see things, they have to say it. But the ideology, they can't fix that. They're not going to see it. They're going to appear to be devout Muslims until we Muslims expose that firewall between political Islam and those who believe in the American experiment.
You know, we're also hearing that Tafshin, who was born in Pakistan, may have ties to the Red Mosque there, which is infamous for its radicalization efforts and violent rhetoric. We know that this type of indoctrination can begin at a young age. Don't we need to get rid of the idea that radicalization is simply the last step in the evolution of a terrorist mentality? Doesn't it often begin with the hatred, for example, of all things American?
Amen. And, you know, this is the issue. It's sort of like trying to delink the Communist Party from the Soviets in the Cold War. There are parties and politics that involve political Islam where they want the society to be run by clerics, to be run by Sharia and institutionalization of Islamic law. In our summit yesterday, we concluded 15 reform organizations from Canada, the U.S., and Europe. We developed a 2-page declaration that's available at our website. We would ask every community to take it to their mosque, to take it to their Islamic center, and ask Muslims, do you believe in the equality of men and women? Are you ready to call for an end to all caliphates? Are you ready to call for an end to any Islamic state? Do you want to separate mosque and state? All of these things. Will you end the concept of violent jihad? If they give you an apologetic, they're part of the radicalization process. If they give you a clean, they'll sign that, they're part of the solution and the reforms we need to have in the Islamic community.
In the few seconds I have left, I want to ask you about your thoughts about whether or not we need to start targeting some mosques that may be spewing some hateful rhetoric out there in the United States, similar to what we saw after 9/11. And if you do think we have to, is that going to result in a backlash against those who say we're fighting against religious freedoms?
Let me change the word in your question. I wouldn't say target. I would say shed the light of day, expose them, use the antiseptic of the war of ideas, expose their ideas as being un-American, their rhetoric as blaming foreign policy, their rhetoric of anti-Semitism needs to be exposed. The French recently shut down 3 mosques. If they're preaching violence, that's un-American and against our laws. But if they're preaching hate, in America we've learned it works better to expose that, because if you shut that down, every country that tries it has proved it actually makes them grow and spread like wildfire underground, because you can't, groups like mine can't expose it and deal with it. And it's just like not naming it, because you can't identify who your friends are and versus who your foes are without listening to the rhetoric of your foes.
Dr. Zuhdi Jasser, pleasure to have you on the show today. Thank you so much for your insights. We really appreciate it, sir.
Thanks. Thanks, Uma.